Hello everyone, welcome to today's case study presentation based on the use of the Learning Curve Suite, also known as the TLC Suite. Today's session will focus primarily on a client evaluation with the TLC assessment and analysis using the TLC report, which generates a whole brain training plan. My name is John Bale and I'm going to be your moderator for this event. For those of you that are not aware, today's webinar will be given by Peter van Deusen. Since 2001, Pete has taught thousands of practicum workshops on neurofeedback around the world. As a trainer himself with a background in management of change and hospital turnarounds, Pete's focus has always been on putting the power of brain science in the hands of the frontline trainers, making it faster, less expensive, and more accessible. Through Brain Trainer, his trainer's Q assessment, also known as the TLC assessment within the TLC Suite, and the whole brain training approach, known as the TLC report within the Beefy's TLC Suite, are offering a powerful tool for brain evaluations and a strong alternative to normative databases and Z-scores. Now, during today's session, you will be able to ask questions to Pete about his discussion of his method as well as the case studies. And there's two ways you can ask these questions. So one way is that you can type your questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. The control panel is usually found at the upper right of your computer screen. At the appropriate time, I will look over your questions and I will ask them on your behalf to Pete, and then you'll have your answer. Alternatively, if you do want to try to verbally ask a question, which most people seem to run away from, but it's okay, you can click the raise hand icon, which looks like a little open hand, as you can see right here. And that button's also found on the GoToWebinar control panel. So at the appropriate time, when we're going through a questions period, I will unmute you and you'll be able to verbally ask your question. Now, don't worry about remembering these instructions right now. I will be reminding them to you as we go along and at the appropriate times. So with that being done, it's time to begin the presentation, and I will make you, Pete, the presenter. So a small little window is going to appear in your computer, and it's going to say you are the presenter, and you just have to click the Show My Screen button to accept.
I got it.
There you go, yep. Trainer's Q and WBT for infinity. Go ahead.
Okay. Pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm going to go through a couple of things today. Let me get us a full screen view here. Okay. So we're going to talk about the trainer's Q and the whole brain training concept as it's ready to go for infinity. Let's talk for a second very quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a kind of an overview of the alternatives, and then I'll actually show you the file that you can use, which is available for infinity. We start off with the concept that the brain, the trainable brain, the energy brain, which is something which is not widely thought about or talked about outside of our field, basically represents a combination of patterns which have developed in response to an individual's experience over time. Because those patterns tend to become stable, oftentimes those patterns are developed very early in life and continue to operate throughout our lives. For example, a child who's experiencing an abusive situation in their early life, the brain is very likely to develop a hypervigilant pattern. So I'm always aware, always looking out for danger, nobody sneaks up on me. Unfortunately, what happens then is that as the situation that caused that pattern disappears from our lives, the pattern remains. And so in many cases, as with hypervigilance, it ends up keeping the client in the state that it was designed to protect him against. The person is constantly feeling afraid, anxious, and so forth, even when there's no real reason to do it, and has difficulty forming relationships and so forth. And so there are habitual responses, emotional, physical, behavioral, and so forth, which result from those patterns. And an important thing to remember is that our brains actually control our experience. They aren't controlled by it. So a person who is hypervigilant and a person who has a very calm outlook on life walk into the same situation, exactly the same situation, but see it in completely different ways. And so as we change that pattern, we can change, literally the person can change their entire lives. The other thing is that those patterns can be seen in the cortex. That's the whole basis of the assessment, whether it's a QEEG or whatever, by looking at relationships between frequencies, the symmetry of where particular frequencies and energy levels are, connectivity within the brain, and the brain's ability to activate. And of course, the great promise of neurofeedback is that with training, people can actually change the homeostatic situation in their brains. Okay, so for the last 40 years, we've been using increasingly a tool called the population-based QEEG. The QEEG has been probably the most important thing in terms of learning about the living brain since the real advent of computers back in the 80s, in terms of its ability to give us very, very immediate information about what's happening within the brain and giving us huge amounts of data. Essentially, the QEEG is set up for researchers. It's not set up for trainers. It looks at the brain from a micro point of view. For example, a QEEG would describe a herd of horses by telling you how tall each horse was, how many legs they had, how long the tail was, how long the mane was, how good the teeth were, and all those kinds of things. That's terrific information for a researcher, but it doesn't really tell you the answer to the great existential question of all trainers: where do I put the electrodes, and what do I train up, and what do I train down? In order to do that, we need some information, not just data. So the QEEG, the population-based Q, which I'm going to call the PopQ from now on because it's shorter, has been marketed several times as a tool for trainers. Lexicor, sort of at the end of its life in the 90s, was trying to find a way to get more people to buy QEEGs, their equipment, and they offered an opportunity to lease the equipment and basically send your data in and have it processed, and they would send you back a list of the Z-scores from highest to lowest, and the idea was that you would just train whatever the highest Z-score was until that normalized, then you train the next one, then you train the next one, then you train the next one. But that didn't go very far. Lexicor is not around anymore. Bob Thatcher and Brainmaster in the last 5 or 8 years began something along the same lines, but with a lot better marketing, a lot more talk about how scientific it is, and using the normative databases, which Thatcher developed back in the 80s, that allows people to essentially look at the Z-scores, but then they developed the idea of actually training the Z-scores. So the problem with training from the PopQ, when you have the $10, $12, $15,000 system, is that you get huge amounts of data, but you really don't get any information about the brain, or very little of it, and you don't get a plan. And so my point of view has always been that on the ground, working with clients, changing people's lives, that are my major focus of interest. And as a result, my position has been to see if we can't find a way to get something that has the same information about the brain, which is important, in the same data, but provide it in a very different way. With the population Q, you essentially, in most cases, you're going to end up doing Z-score training because it's the only thing you can figure out to do. Just train whatever the Z-score is that are too high, quote unquote, and everybody's going to get better. And in some cases, people will also then send the whole thing off again after sending it off for processing, send it off again to have someone produce a plan for them and pay extra for that. One of the things that was a bother for me when I started looking at Z-score and normative databases is my very first question was, who decided who's normal? I think it's fair to say that probably none of us would believe that a poet and an accountant have the same brain. So which one of them are we training everybody to be like? Or do we just train people away from particular strengths in any area toward that sort of average? Because that's really what Z-scores does. It takes the number of standard deviations you are away from the average at 3 hertz with eyes closed at f7 and trains that toward the average. So where those came from is the question that I've always had, and something that I think is a real problem with that approach. There's another problem which is a really interesting one, and that is if you're using this system, you are comparing an 8-year-old kid who comes into your office today with an 8-year-old kid from the 1980s, or a great number of them, and possibly into the early 90s. So children who had never seen the internet, had probably never had a computer, didn't have a cell phone, never heard of social media, thought that TV was 5 channels and that's it, if they were lucky. Those people are the ones that we're training today's children to be like. And finally, the other issue with the population Q is that essentially there are many things in an individual brain which are not going to be flat on the average within the bell-shaped curve. But some of those things are, for example, special talent in music or being very good in math or whatever, things that the client wants to keep, likes it. But there's no way for the Qejy to say, oh, no, that's a strength, not a weakness. We won't train that one. Okay, so those are issues from my point of view relating to this. And the last one is that the population Q trains everybody, as I said, to average, to mean. Whereas we also know what a peak brain looks like. And more importantly, the peak brain is much easier to describe than the normal brain, quote unquote, the average brain. So a lot of our approach has been to sort of, wherever possible, say, well, the peak brain would look like this, and your brain has these patterns. So rather than trying to train to an average, let's try and get your brain to move in the direction of where the peak would be. Finally, the population Q is very expensive. The hardware and software are expensive to buy. You have to pay to ship the data off unless you buy a database and have somebody process it for you, wait for that to come back, and it's just something which is not quick and easy to do in your office. So we have been working with Infinity for, wow, I don't even know how many years, a number of years. The TLC was developed, ported over into the Infinity by Francois when we were, as back in the early 2000s. And so it's something which has been around for a while. There are people who use it, but the problem has been still is the close, is, okay, now I've got a lot of data, but I still don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do with it. So with the TLC 7, you have the ability to gather essentially a quantitative EEG in between 12 and 20 channels. 12 is the minimum. If you're using a 2-channel machine, then you would probably do 6 recordings of 2 channels to get 12 to keep the time down. If you're using a 4-channel Infinity, you could easily do 5 recordings and have all 20 channels that we would have in a normal QEEG. The difference is that you don't need to buy another amp. You use your Infinity, you record the data with your Infinity, you artifact the data with your Infinity, and then you simply load it in to the Excel file called TLC7, and I'll show you how that works on your computer. This is something that takes a matter of minutes, literally, after you've gathered the data. So what is the TLC7? First of all, it's a descriptive file. It's not normative. We don't talk about whether a person is normal or not normal. We talk about whether they have a fast brain, they have a slow brain, they have a brain which is dominated by middle frequencies, a variety of other kinds of things. So it essentially looks at the relationships within the client's brain rather than comparing the client's brain against somebody else's. We can do that because there's been a huge amount of QEEG research that's been done over the years where people use the Q the way it was designed to use. Researchers would, for example, bring 10 people with generalized anxiety disorder in and do QEEGs of them. Now we have a subpopulation that we can compare against the population, as opposed to comparing a single individual against the whole population. And in doing that, they were able to identify that there were certain patterns that consistently differentiated between the anxious person and the people who were not anxious. So the TLC essentially goes through a whole series of those which have been collected over the years and continue to be collected as new ones are identified, and they're processed. The data is processed to identify whether those patterns exist or not, and if they do, what they're likely to be in terms of symptoms, how they'll be related to those. The TLC looks at the prefrontal. It looks at the sensory motor cortex, the C3, CZ, C4. It looks at the default mode network and the salience network. It looks at the midline. It looks at the temporal lobes. It looks at language processing, Broca's and Wernicke's areas, and the ability of the brain to access deeper states, to be in contact with its own subconscious, among other things. So it's a pretty broad look at the brain, and it's looking at the same areas that the QEEG would be. But after you've identified the patterns, the TLC then produces a plan which you can implement to train the client's brain toward the peak based on a custom view of where his brain is right now, what patterns are there, rather than looking at just means. So if you're using a 2, 4, or 6 channel Infinity, you can record and artifact the sites. We can, as I said before, between 12 and 20, ideally 20. There is an adapter available that can be used with the Infinity for the electro cap, which speeds things up, allows you to put the cap on one time, prep all the sites at one time. The cap doesn't shift. You don't have to worry about electrodes moving or falling off or anything like that. That's all done in the beginning, usually 5 or 6 minutes, and then you literally move through the groups of 5 4-channel packages or whatever you're using. If you have a 4-channel machine and you're going to record all 20 sites, you're recording 3 minutes of each site. You record a minute of eyes closed, a minute of eyes open baseline, and a minute of task. So you're getting data on the brain from what should be its calmest, most relaxed to the point of its most activated. And we can see how the brain shifts, what patterns change as it makes those moves. Then to actually load that data after you have exported the files, which the package that we already have that's already available to you for Infinity, the TLC Suite, already does that for you. Then you load that into the Excel form, and it produces a whole set of graphs and charts and tables that you can look at if you're interested in learning more about the brain, different views of the brain, and as you get more comfortable with it, you're going to get more comfortable with being able to make your own adjustments to your plans. But the cool thing, it actually grew out of an earlier presentation that I did on the TLC Suite for Infinity users. Had several people who said, you know, what would be really great would be if it would give us a written report about what's in this brain. So as you'll see in a little bit, the TLC7 does that literally in a matter of a couple of seconds. It will give you a 5 or 6 page written report that summarizes, organizes the different ways of looking at the brain, different areas of looking at it, and then identifies for this client which ones are present and which symptoms are likely to be related to those. Here's a simple example of, I can't see it yet, but you'll see it a little bit later. But the report looks like something like this. There's black text in it. The black text is a summary of what a person needs to know about, for example, frequency speeds. And then the red text specifically talks about this particular client and a variety of different measures. The TLC7 can be done in English, Spanish, Portuguese, or Italian. We have German underway, and you know, other languages are available if people are interested in them. But by clicking a button on this file, you change the entire file to that new language. The report changes, training plan changes, all of the graphs change. And you can print it, or many people output the report as a PDF to send to a referral source. A lot of the people that I'm working with here in Brazil are doing a lot of work with physicians now, because the physicians, once they've seen this report, they love it. You know, it gives them a tremendous amount of information about the brain. And obviously for families and clients, that can be a very nice thing to have as well. So let me talk real quickly about the idea of the whole brain training plan as opposed to Z-score. Both of us are saying there is a homeostasis here. So you're not going to move, in most cases, a homeostasis very efficiently by grabbing one thing and pulling or pushing on that. The idea of the whole brain training plan is that there is a circuit of 5 sessions, much like what you would do if you went to the gym. The first time you go, you work your arms and your shoulders. The next time you go, you work your back and your hips. Third time you go, you work your legs and your calves, whatever. But you don't do the same exercise over and over and over. You work different areas because they're all linked together. So you don't really have much in the way of resistance, because the amount of training that's being done on any one pattern, which is really critical or sort of a foundation for that brain structure, is sort of hit one time very briefly, and then all the other things that help to hold it in place are hit again. So we move one point in a session, then we move another point in another session, then we move another point in another session, move another point in another session, and we end up moving the whole square to a different place over a period of time. Almost all of the training plans do include Alpha-Theta Training, which helps to integrate the results of the training and also helps to give the brain a chance, as it becomes more stable, as it becomes more able to move and let go of older patterns, to wander down into the basement once every 5 sessions and look in all of those boxes and suitcases that are back in the dark corners that nobody's opened for a long time, and slowly allows that information to come out of the subconscious and become a part of the functioning brain. What our experience has been as we've used this is that most people are doing at least 3, which would be 15 sessions, 3 cycles through, but in many cases they're still ending up running maybe 5 or 6, sometimes as many as 8, depending on what kinds of issues we're talking about. The TLC7 also produces a training plan for you. So it tells you block 1 here. This is before the plan has been increased. This is basically just suggestions. But it gives you for block 1, which would be your first session, 4-channel and 2-channel training options, 1 or 2 for the 2 channels, 1, 2, or 4 for the 4 channels, depending on what amp you're using. And then it can help you select by clicking on some of these buttons to say, I want a 4-channel plan or I want a 2-channel plan. It will tell you these are the things that we recommend as being most important in this particular brain. That's completely, it's available, or the trainer has complete ability to override that manually to adjust which ones are selected, even to add things which aren't there or remove things which are there. So it gives you something which you can use out of the box, and people who are doing that, literally trainers who are starting off and neurofeedback, are getting very, very good results just using the auto plan. But almost everybody, as they get into it more and they get more comfortable looking at the assessment and they have their own experience of what kinds of things have worked with the kinds of clients they work with, they have the complete ability to customize the plan for themselves. And the plan basically tells you what the active site should be, what your reference site should be, what protocol you would use, whether you're doing it eyes open or eyes closed, and for people who are going to use the cap or who want to set up electrodes in advance, it tells you all of the sites that would be used during that training session. So it's very, very detailed, but it's very, very practical in terms of what you need to know to go ahead. The whole brain training suite of the protocols is something that we've started to work on. Francois had several of them in his earlier suite, but there are a number of things that we would like to add to it. So the plan will include some protocols that are not currently in the suite. You would have to take those from other suites that you might be using in Infinity. But as we're developing this suite of protocols for Infinity, one of the things that we would like to do is have user input. So for people who have gotten the TLC7 and are starting to use it, as we develop a set of protocols, we would send those out, ask you to test those, tell us what would make this better, ask us questions like, why did you use that instead of that tool, and help us make this quickly and make it a very powerful tool for Infinity users. The TLC7 is what we've been talking about so far, but there is a TLC8 which is underway, probably aiming for around April that will be ready. It will have a larger client report, perhaps even an online one that has a lot of drop-down menus depending on whether a person has an issue in a particular area or not. That will be very integrated into the plan in terms of what your training is, not only based on what we see in the brain, but also the symptom patterns that the client's reporting. It will allow you to use 2 or more client reports for the same client. I can have dad and mom and Junior all fill out client reports for Junior, and that data will be combined. The training recommendations will be separated from the whole brain training plan. So if you're not interested in the whole brain training plan, but you have protocols that you like to use, you'll be able to develop just a list that tells you these are the highest rated issues in this brain, and on that list it will also say for anxiety, for terminal insomnia, for whatever the issue happens to be, so that help you choose which ones you want to use. And there will be the ability to produce a training plan even without recording EEG, particularly if you're working with children who are 5 or 6 or 7 years old and hyperactive. it's a real pain even to do 15 minutes of recording because they simply can't sit still. So the idea will be with a more detailed client report, we'll be able to get you started with training. And what a lot of our people are doing now who are testing this is that they'll use that and they'll do 10 sessions of that, by which time most clients have settled down enough that then you can go ahead and run the TLC7 and gather the brain data and see if there's anything you want to add to what you're currently doing. Hopefully everybody is still hearing me.
Yep, we can still hear you.
Some message. Okay, good. I'm getting a message about possible problems.
No, it's all good.
Okay. Okay, good. And the TLC8 will also produce for you a list based on the client report of tracking symptoms, so that one of our approaches that's different to brain training is that I always tell people, if you have to do an assessment before and an assessment after to decide whether the training worked or not, it didn't work. People didn't come in because the theta to beta ratio was screwed up. They came in because they wanted to be able to do something differently. And so this allows us to stay focused on real life issues to tell us how effectively the training is working for a client. And everybody who has the TLC7 will get the TLC8. That's not, there's no cost for upgrading or anything like that. Last thing real quickly, this is something that was sent to us a couple of weeks ago by a user in Europe who has been using Discovery in the NeuroGuide for a while and has been using the TLC7 in whole brain training over the past year. And he's basically saying that what he's getting in terms of information from the two is very, very consistent. The TLC doesn't include a lot of the small detail stuff that the Qejy does because it's not necessary for training. And for training purposes, he finds that it's more valuable and useful than the population-based Qejy because it has a lot of the things that are based on identifying those patterns which aren't found in a Qejy. Also, the system as we're using it now, which has the assessment and the training plan and then the training protocols, is seamless. So it's very, very easy to implement. And the clients tend to be reporting to him that they are getting better experience of training from using the TLC system. So he's saying that he's actually finding it. He's got a $15,000 system that he's not using very often, or he uses it just because he's got it to get the assessment, but he tends to be using the TLC system instead. Okay. Anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? Any comments or anything like that?
So
we'll go on to.
We'll just give them a moment. So you can now ask a question quite quickly. If you want to ask a question, you can type it into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. It's usually found towards the upper right. Alternatively, if you do want to verbally ask a question, you can do so by clicking the raise hand icon. So it looks like that open hand. It's sort of hanging off the side of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll give you all just a moment to type out these messages if you have any, but once that's done, we'll go on with the actual review of cases. So let me just see if anyone has any questions. We don't have any quite yet. I'm going to give everyone just, another 10 seconds because it does take a while sometimes to type.
Well, it's not something where if you ask a question, you have a question you ask, but didn't think of it right exactly on time, you can still type it into your box. And
that's very true.
Get it.
We actually have two people who want to verbally ask questions, so let's give this a try. Usually people shy away from this, so I enjoy it. I'm going to unmute you, Francois, and let's see if you can speak. Francois, can you hear us?
Yeah, I hear you. Fine, thank you. I have a question. Is it possible to import in TLC the data from Qejy system like Euroguide or something else, PDF files?
No, that's something that's probably the most common question that I get asked. The software that the way that the Neuroguide works is that you record basically a big file, and it gets processed when it's passed through the database. Somebody would have to create an output file from that that would produce the text file that we could bring into the TLC, but none of the people who are selling QEEGs have been particularly interested in doing that so far. I've been working for a while with some people to try and find a software possibility that would allow that, but there isn't anything out there that I'm aware of.
An EDF file is always possible to export. Is it possible to import an EDF file? Because this is simply a text file.
The data is in a text file. All of the processing is done inside the Excel file. You can export the results of the Excel file from Infinity or from Excel, but that wouldn't do you any good in you know, if you haven't got the data. So the problem is that they're two completely different formats. What you're doing in Infinity is you're literally measuring each one of the things that we actually measure in gathering the data and producing this output file, which can be brought in. But I don't believe that. I don't know how anybody would bring. Well, I think the big issue has a lot to do with motivation. If you're selling a $10,000 piece of equipment, what's the motivation to make it easier for people to get something that's less expensive and perhaps more focused on training? That's the only thing I can tell you. I've tried. I've worked actually with users in a couple of cases, and to date, Infinity is the only company back a while back when that actually took the time and energy to go through and figure out how to produce the output file from an Infinity file. But you know, the other companies haven't been particularly interested in that. The other question?
Okay, I do not get the point, because an EDF file is an interchange format file, to exchange file. This is neutral. This has nothing to do with the manufacturer. I use EDF files for doing also brain maps with NewMind or with other systems. So why is it not possible to import an EDF file into TLC to make the plan and to make the map?
Because it's not the same data.
And unfortunately, the file
talk.
might actually work, but it's the way that the data is presented. Oftentimes, the data that goes in the TLC file, it's not like the raw data points, but actually already calculated statistics. I think it just, the way the numbers go in, it just does not automatically work, or at least it's not designed for that. Sorry to interrupt, Pete.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
No, I was just going to suggest I'll be happy to write with you or talk with you afterwards, but I think we probably should move ahead.
We have a few more questions popping up. I'm just going to go to those questions from other people. Thank you, Khosla. Let me just remute you. Okay, so questions. All right. Where can one get the electrocap adapter for the electrocap to the Infinity? Is a question from Louise. I don't know if you have the answer to that, Pete.
You can buy it from Electrocap or brain-trainer.com. We also sell it, and we sell the caps. So it's basically just a board that allows you to plug the cap into the 25-pin connector on one end of the board, and then has 20 electrodes, 22 or 23 electrodes actually, that come out of it that are color-coded. So once you've got it set up, you just plug in the blue and the yellow and the green and the brown, and you've got certain sites. You gather your data, then you unplug those and plug in the next 4 colors and gather that data.
Okay, yeah, Deborah just
That
provided
type
actually
of
a link
units.
in. Yeah, Deborah provided a link in the
Okay.
questions box actually. There's another question in. What's the cost of the TLC 7? We're going to get to that at the end, Qejy. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, because we have a moment where we're going to look at that. Is it possible to import the data from earlier versions of the TLC into this latest version? Yes, it is, Elsie. It automatically works backwards with the other previous data. Sorry, I'm rushing through these questions. I do actually want to let Pete continue. Here's another question from Louise. Sometimes with a young child, you set off wanting to record 12 sites, but only get to record 6. How does this influence the report?
You've got half the data for a basic. I mean, you basically recorded 3 different site pairs. So what we're looking at is F3, F4, C3, C4, P3, P4, temporals T3, T4, and then F7, F8, T5, T6, FP1, FP2, O1, O2, and then the midline sites, FZ, CZ, PZ, and OZ. If you happen to record, let's say, just C3 and C4 and CZ and OZ or whatever, I don't know that we'd be able to actually do anything with it in the TLC. But if you have a client who can't get beyond recording the 3, you already know what the problem is. It's a control problem. And so working prefrontal cortex and working sensory motor cortex, using some of the bipolar montages that are very, very helpful for working with hyperactivity, that will tend to calm the person down. And in many cases, as you get started doing that, you don't need to go further and do an assessment. You know, you've just got someone whose development is behind the curve.
All right, so I think we're going to stop the questions for now, and we'll have another questions period towards the end, but I do want to give Pete a chance to actually go ahead and show you this case example. So go ahead, Pete.
Okay, well, so when we open this file in Excel, it starts off with the assessment button up here. And if I click that, it opens a window which allows me to specifically choose, if I want to, which files have these particular sites in them. I can also do it in 2-channel mode, which gives me the sites individually, but in 4-channel mode it's very fast this way. And we suggest that you put the data in a single folder and that each file is named with, or includes in its name, the site which is in channel 1 active. So that would be F3, T3, FZ, and so forth. If that's done, and if you have processed the client report, then you can, and that's also in the same file, you just click Quick Select, and that allows me then to go to, actually, it's not where it is. So here's the folder that has some data in it, and I'll just say, okay, that's the correct folder. And the assessment then says, okay, this is what I think is the report. Here's what I think is the F3 file, the T3 file, and so forth. They're all set. I then just click to process the data. And it takes it a little bit of time. We're going to actually have to go through a step here that you wouldn't have to go through. In Infinity, you can do your artifacting in Infinity as you would normally. In this case, there is an actual artifacting step that's included. But that's why it's taking a while. It's going through and looking at each second by second to decide what the values should be and whether to make changes or not. And then this just shows me what I need to do to, if anything, to change it. I'm not going to change anything here. I'll just say go ahead and bring these in. This is basically showing me for eyes closed, eyes open, and task. The sites which are green, at least 50% of the data passed. The sites which are blue, it didn't. If I change this to 37, recalculate it. That'll give it to us. Once we actually get that data ready, this is basically where you would start, because your data would come in already artifacted. And there's a place when you're gathering the data in the first place that you can say, don't artifact. And it jumps right over this process. There's a little button. So by clicking on this now, what the file is doing is going through and actually removing all the lines of data that are considered to be an artifact, and then creating all the various different views of the brain, so that we can take a look at it. You see across the bottom of the page here, there are these tabs for analyze, synchrony, maps, and so forth, and those are all different ways of looking at the brain. By clicking on those, we'll be able to see those views. Okay, so it's produced now the assessment, and I could go back to the client report and look at the things that the client has chosen, information about history and so forth. The analyze page is a whole series. This is for people that are really into numbers and want to look at each of the various different categories individually. There is a synchrony page which shows us for fast frequency or slow frequencies and fast frequencies and gamma, showing us coherence and phase relationships for each of those. If numbers are red, that indicates that those values are higher than expected, and if they're blue, they're lower than expected. In those cases, we probably would make a training decision with that information. The maps page, I can't really resize this because of the little window here, but this basically is very much like the maps that you would see in a queue, and we can see in this particular case that this client has a problem with alpha. It looks like perhaps even a head injury somewhere in this line here from FC to CZ. Very, very high levels of alpha. Slow alpha, 6 to 10, although there is some 10 to 12, it's back where it should be. This is the front of the head, this is the back and the two sides, but it doesn't go away with the eyes open, and it doesn't go away at task. So that's something that we would want to be training. You get the same information in histograms. You can look at the histograms of the brain. You could say, I just want to look at eyes closed. Okay, not going to help. I can turn off the various different eyes open or task and just see eyes closed or just see eyes open. There's a page for symmetry that allows us to see if there are areas of asymmetry. Here's a strong area of asymmetry, but it's FZ and PZ. Unfortunately, what we see is that FZ has a lot more alpha than PZ does, which is sort of backwards from what we would expect. So we can get information from that. The issues of variability. This is the coefficient of variability for the various different frequencies. Blue is eyes closed, green is eyes open, red is task. And there is channel 1 and channel 2 are the two bars in each color. So I can see that alpha at F3 and F4 with eyes closed is extremely variable. It looks like it's an area that we might want to train. That's the main thing that we use it for, is to identify areas that look like they're out of control. The heads page allows us to look at the whole head, all of the sites that have data, with each of the frequencies, starting with delta going up to gamma, either amplitude or percent of total amplitude here, and you can switch to eyes open or task if you want to look at that. If we look at the summary report, this is the thing I mentioned before. I'm going to choose the Excel version, and in a matter of a couple of seconds, you have the executive summary. So it starts out, gives us some information about the client, and then if the client has reported issues that were apparently important, those are listed here. There's a section on the apparent data quality. Were there any things that indicated that there may have been a bad recording? And then there's a section on the findings, starting off with brain activation patterns, particularly talking then about frequency. And when we get down to the red, we can see that in this particular brain, it's not dominated by any particular frequency, but it does have these patterns. There's a low overall peak frequency, which could be related to problems with attention and motivation and so forth. And where are the sites that appears? Theta to beta ratios are high. Beta peak frequency is high, which indicates there's high beta in the brain. And then you could go down to the alpha areas, a whole bunch of different things in alpha, the midline, and so forth. So that's done very, very quickly, and by simply clicking up here that I want to have a PDF, I can choose this page to produce a PDF of it. The last thing then we'll look at is the options page. To produce your training plan, you come over here to start protocol selection, and it will give me the 5 blocks, 5 training sessions, and recommend things which it finds as patterns that are consistent with problems in this particular brain. It tells you what sites it would train. These are the 4 channel ones here, the 2 channel ones over here, and I could say I want a protocol, I want a training plan for a 2-channel amplifier. If I click on this, it will tell me these are the ones that it selects and that it recommends. But I could also say, no, I don't think that's a good one. I want to do this one instead. Or I can change things that are written in here as well. I could change which sites I want to use for my active sites or any of those kinds of things. If you then when you finish, you just click on complete the training plan, and it will give you the plan showing you this information. This is also printable. I print one of these every 5 sessions and make my notes on it as I'm going through the session, but it gives me the various different kinds of things that you would train for this client. So that's one that I'm just going to put that away, and we'll grab a file that has already been opened.
Just so you know, Pete, we have about 5 minutes left. We're going to be going a little bit over time with our session, but that's okay. For anyone who does have to leave very soon, the session is recorded. You will get a chance to watch this ending at a later time.
Yeah, and we'll kind of go through this fairly quickly if anybody has specific questions. So this is a client who has literally had his entire world fall apart. He was an anxious person, previously had irritable bowel syndrome, a number of other issues, but he invested everything he had in a company that was going to make him rich, and the whole thing collapsed. And so he's literally losing his house, losing his car, everything was in terrible condition when he first came in. So we could take a look at this very quickly, and we can see on the Analyze page, we have percent of, I'm going to switch the the language here because this one's in Portuguese. So I'll just switch it to English, and now everything's in English. Now I can go here and I can say, okay, the red numbers are higher than expected. And if they're red and bold, they're much higher than expected. Here is fast percent with eyes closed, fast percent with eyes open. We can see that there is a really dominant, lots and lots of fast activity in this brain. And the blue, which is lower than expected, there's a lot of blue missing. And in the back of the brain, which is where we would expect to see slow frequencies, this person doesn't have them. There is basically a block into his subconscious. He's not interested in dealing with something down there. Fast alpha peak frequency in the back of the brain, also relatively okay in the front. Beta peak frequencies are quite high, indicating that there's a lot of high beta in his brain, but his overall peak frequencies are low, at least in the front here. So the front is basically shut down. His processing area isn't doing anything. That's one example. We can look to see if he has hot temporal lobes. These are all showing that they're high, and then this shows us that T3 in high beta is 62% higher than the average of the other sites on the left side, and on the right side it's 80% higher than the average. So the temporal lobes are an area that we definitely would want to train. These here relate to reversals, alpha and beta reversals between left and right sides of the head and front and back. Those are major, the work of Davidson and others, a major issue that we look at. This is the midline, so we can see if there are places where it appears that the cingulate is sort of very different from the cortex. And then we have here an area that shows us level of sensory motor rhythm at C3, CZ, and C4 with eyes open, and his theta to beta ratios. This is with eyes open, and then we can see down here at task that he actually reverse activates. His theta to beta ratios go up instead of down when he goes to task. The maps page would show us that there are a couple of really hot areas here, including T4 at 23 and 30 to 38 hertz, the hypervigilant frequency. He doesn't really produce much alpha. There's a little bit of it back here. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can see on this graph. If we look at the summary report, we can see that his issues have to do with a fast dominant brain, high frequency activity related. He's very stuck in logical rational thought, doesn't really deal with emotions very well. It thinks and talks a lot, but he's basically to the point where the stress response, anxiety, control, need to control, and irritability and sleep problems are all issues related to this. And here are a variety of ways that we can see that. And then there are some other patterns as well that are mentioned. And if we go on to the last step, I've already processed the training plan here. It gives me the places that it would train, the references that we would use, whether they're common reference, linked reference, or independent references, and what the training approach would be. Anybody have any questions? We sort of
all right. There were a few questions being posed. Again, everyone, since we are running out of time, I think this might be towards the ending of the session. So if you have any questions, you can type those into the questions box, and I'll read them. Or alternatively, if you do want to verbally ask a question, you can click the raise hand icon, and then we'll unmute you so that you can speak. Let me just look at these questions. All right. Another one from Khosla is one more question. The one big advantage of the Infinity platform is to combine other biosensors like HRV, etc. Is there a plan to integrate those with the TLC?
Not from me. I think that would be something that other people might do, especially if we develop the suite. What I have sort of back in the early 90s when I started doing neurofeedback, I actually started with biofeedback and looked at temperature, GSR, and things like that. And when I began working with EEG, I sort of decided that in most cases, if I was training right, I didn't need those things, because when the brain began to change, temperature changed, GSR levels changed, muscle tension often did. So it's not necessarily a part of what we do. This is much more focused just on EEG. That's a good question.
Okay. We have a question from Michael. So we could prep a full 1020 cap, gather a TLC map under several conditions using Infinity or some sort of adapter, and then maybe use that cap while on the person to gather separate data for a POP-Q.
As far as I know, you could. If you can gather it in Infinity and you can use the cap, you could certainly do the same thing. You would record your 15 minutes, whatever time the 15 minutes would be the recording time for the TLC, and then you could record whatever you would send to NeuroGuide.
Okay. So we don't have any other questions right now, and I do realize we're sort of over time. Are you completed showing this person, or do you want to sort of wrap it up, Pete?
I'm comfortable. I mean, I can stay around if people are interested, or if you want, you can email me. John can provide my email address if you have specific questions or you want to discuss something that I said. I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to give a sort of outro to everyone now, and thank you very much for spending your time doing this with us, Pete. I realize there's a little bit of rush to everyone, but there's just so much to discuss, and it's really, really fascinating. So it's hard to sort of cram this all into a 1 hour session. Now, if any of you still have questions, you can keep typing them in as I just discuss these last little things, and we will again look right before the end to see if there's any more questions for Pete to answer. I'm just going to make myself presenter right here so I can show my information. So for anyone who is interested in adopting the TLC Suite method for use with the Biograph Infinity, you can purchase it from the Beefy for $795 US. Now, this is a large amount compared to other suites we sell. However, it does let you analyze as many clients as you possibly want using this assessment. A good comparison for NeuroGuide or Z-Scores that you have to pay them yearly fees of much higher amounts in order to use their system. With us, you buy it once and then you have it forever on that computer or until your computer dies. But really, it's good, no constant fees every single year, and allows you to analyze as many people as you want. With the Beefy's TLC Suite, you do get all the documentation for recording an assessment and creating a full brain training approach. And really, this has no limit aside from it being just on the one computer that you've already installed it on. For those of you who've actually previously purchased older versions of the TLC Suite, you will be getting notification tomorrow of upgrading your systems. Now, the upgrade will give you the latest Infinity assessment software. However, it does not include the latest TLC report that creates this automatic whole brain training plan. If you are interested in adopting the newest TLC 7 report, as he calls it, that creates the auto plan, it is going to be an additional cost of $600 US. Because you guys are previous users, we're giving you it at much larger discount. Again, we're going to have more information for you all tomorrow once we send out the notifications to everyone. Thought Technology is very, very happy to have people using the TLC method on their equipment, and they've actually set up a promotion with the BFE, where if any of you are interested in buying a whole new complete equipment system with Thought Technology, you can get 10% off on that large purchase if you use this discount coupon code that's shown on screen right now, this BFE10 off. So if any of you do not currently use Thought Technology or their neurofeedback system and are interested in buying that, use this coupon to save hundreds of dollars on your next purchase of that stuff. I'd also like to remind everyone that next week there's an open house on the TLC Suite with myself. That's February 25th at the same time as right now. I'll be reviewing the sort of technical aspects of the software and showing you what it actually looks like when you run an assessment and send that data into the TLC report. You can sign up for that. It's free at bfe.org. And I look forward to any of you who decide to show up in that one. As Pete suggested, or didn't suggest, he said, we're actually working on the TLC training protocols. Those are currently in development. One of the main developers is actually here right now. She's hiding a little bit. We haven't let her speak, but she's there. For those of you who currently use Biograph Infinity and are interested in joining this test team where we'd send you the training protocols to get your opinion on them so you can sort of give feedback and let us know how you think it might be better, please just notify us at shop@bfe.org and we'll gladly add you to the list of testing that stuff. So before we end, let me just look at some other questions that may have popped up. Here's a question from Louise. Do you have any other demo tapes for using the TLC that we can get from Brain Trainer? Pete?
Demo tapes on our YouTube channel, which is TLC Brain Trainer, all one word. There's some stuff on there that shows how to read the training plan. You could probably find things there. Part of the problem has been that this has been it's been changing so fast. We've been through about 3 updates in the last 3 or 4 months, and working on the TLC 8 now. That we've got a really good manual, which Infinity has also, but we don't have much in the way of videos right now, except for, I mean, take a look at that site. There is a whole section there on whole brain training, which would give you information about that.
The actual, to tune in myself, for the open house session I'll be hosting next week, it'll be just me actually using the software, showing exactly how it works from the perspective of the clinician and going through all those steps and letting people ask questions and see it all live. So that will be recorded. You'll be able to access that later, and I'll send it to everyone. But if you want to attend next week and ask those questions and see it works, then please feel free to do that, because we'll be giving the Biograph Infinity equivalent with the TLC Suite. Okay, let me just check. Are there any other people who have raised hands or more questions? Okay, I do not see any more questions, and I realize we're quite over time, so thank you very much, everyone, for being patient with us, especially because you all have very much busy days. So, Pete, I would like to thank you very much for joining us and giving this presentation. If any of you have any questions at a later time, then gladly send them in to us at shop@bfe.org, and we'll forward them to Pete, or we'll try to answer them if we can answer them ourselves, and we'll get you an answer. Alternatively, if you do want to speak directly to me, even though I'm not presenting today, I'm research@bfe.org. I would like to thank, again, Pete at Brain Trainer for joining us, and I'd like to thank Thought Technology as our main sponsor for also providing that very generous discount code. And as always, you can go to bfe.org and our shop to check out this new TLC item and see any more of the details about it. I think we have another question coming in. Nope, someone just saying, thanks so much, Pete and John. All right, so everyone, have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us. And you will get a notification about being able to check out this recording later today, along with some more information about the TLC Suite and for Biograph Infinity. All right, so thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.